we all have some shared limiting beliefs, right? Like there's not enough time. Well, that's convenient because if there's not enough time, then we don't have to do it. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here today. I say this every week. Like, we've got a really important topic to talk about. So hopefully you're not sick of me saying that. But what we're going to talk about today is really, really important because this is the basis of what I see keeping most ADHD women stuck in their jobs when they have dreams of having a business, or for people who've taken the leap to entrepreneurship or owning a business and they're having a hard time. These are the things that I see keeping them stuck. And so today we're going to talk about the three main things that I see keeping ADHD women entrepreneurs from really thriving in their business. I know that word thriving gets overused a lot, but really having their business do well so that they no longer have to have their full-time job. So we're going to talk about that today. If that interests you, make sure you stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to talk about these three things, but they're all rooted in one big thing. So we're going to hit the ground running here. The first one I want to talk about that is kind of beneath the surface, but I think people have more awareness of it, but maybe not awareness of exactly how it shows up in their life to keep them stuck. And it's big feelings, right? Especially fear and overwhelm. I hear a lot of ADHD women say like, "Oh, I'm so overwhelmed." Don't get me wrong, you come by that honestly, right? Like functioning in this neurotypical world with ADHD can feel overwhelming at times. And what I've noticed is when I hear people say, "I'm overwhelmed," all the action stops. Now, I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, but like on a subconscious level, it seems to me there may be a part of you that's like, "Oh, if I'm overwhelmed, I don't have to do anything." Right. And again, I'm not saying this is intentional. You're not like sitting up at night going, "Ooh, if I just say I'm overwhelmed, I don't have to do anything." No, I think there's a part of you inside that is protecting you by feeling that overwhelm. And I'm not saying you don't have a crap ton on your plate. I'm not saying it's easy all the time to function with ADHD. I'm not saying that you don't have challenges. It's just that what I notice is a lot of times I hear ADHD women, especially entrepreneurs, be like, "I'm so overwhelmed." And then that gets them out of doing the big, hairy, scary things that they need to do for their business so that their business actually makes it and does well. And so to me, a lot of times what that overwhelm is rooted in is fear. And that fear is a big topic, and we're gonna talk about it more. I've got a live event coming up, so make sure you listen all the way through. I'll talk about it at the end of this episode, but we're gonna dig into that fear a lot more during the 3-day live event, starting December 28th. But I will say this, fear has many roots. You know, some of it is fear of being seen, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of looking stupid. Like, we have all these different fears that can play into it, and so when we have fear, there are parts of us inside of ourselves that are like, "Uh-oh, there's fear. We can't deal with fear. So I know I'll create a distraction in some other way," right? Overwhelm is a great distraction, right? And I'm not saying we're not naturally distracted with ADHD. Don't get me wrong. Like, I can be as distracted as the next person. It's just that one of the ways that our parts try and help us is by distracting us with things like overwhelm or big feelings or buying new applications and software to help us, right? And while that part is working so hard to help us and we can express gratitude for that, not ever telling parts of us to go away and stop that. And I'm going to push away the fear because that just makes it louder, right? Because it didn't get its message across. But if instead you can lean into that and be like, what is that fear about? What is that fear about? And we'll talk more about this in the 3-day launch, but really unpacking that and starting to work with it. Because when you do that, you'll be able to move beyond the fear, not because you've pushed it down, but because you are fully aware of the fear you have or that parts of you have, the risks that are involved, and you're doing it with intention. So, fear and overwhelm and other big feelings are a big one. The next thing I see, and this ties closely into those big feelings, is limiting beliefs. There are so many limiting beliefs that we have as ADHD women, entrepreneurs, in general in society. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like if you're a mom with a newborn and a toddler and a 13-year-old or something and you work full time, okay, that's legit. Like it does feel like you have a really full schedule, right? And when we say I don't have enough time, what is going on inside of us, right? And being able to dig into that, work with the parts of you who are doing that, because I guarantee when we're hearing those kind of messages, I don't have enough time. Or another big one is, I can't because I have ADHD, or my ADHD won't let me, or my ADHD is in the way. I guarantee when you're doing that, there is a part of you inside that is just trying to protect you. It just wants you to not have to feel the pain. And so if we can get to the bottom of these limiting beliefs that, you have, you can start to see some shifts in your business. Because those beliefs that I'm not good enough or, oh, they do such a good job, I could never do what they do, or I don't compare or add up, right? I'm not enough. I'm not valued. I can't because I have ADHD. All those limiting beliefs, which I'm just going to say cancel, cancel, because I don't want to take any of that on. But when we have those limiting beliefs inside of us, then we're not going to be able to get stuff done because parts of us don't feel safe to let us. Right. So let's say you're trying to put yourself out there with content, right? Or my new project is to do more Instagram reels and TikTok and get on video again more. Right. And if I have any of those limiting beliefs that, oh, I don't look good on camera, or people don't take me seriously, or I don't have value, people don't see my value, I'm not good enough. We have any of those, cancel, cancel. But if we have any of those, that's going to get in the way of us taking that step to put our content out there, to create the freebie, to show people how we can actually help them, right? To create a podcast for ourselves and even to launch. So, in this upcoming 3-day live that I'm going to teach, we're going to talk about what you can do with these limiting beliefs to start to shift them. Because I got to tell you, this is everything. This is like so much of what's keeping people stuck, and it's beneath the surface. So a lot of times we don't even know that we have this belief, right? Like some of us, especially if you're like me and you've done a lot of your inner work, you can be like, oh yeah, I already worked through my self-worth stuff. I feel pretty great about myself, right? I feel confident. I know what I'm talking about. For me, my many my many degrees and certifications, like, I don't know, they make me feel like I kind of know what I'm talking about, right? Which then I just have a part in my head go, don't toot your own horn too much. When women do that, people think they're arrogant or something. So to be clear, like, yes, I get that. And like, what's that belief coming up for us when that happens? So, if we can start to notice how this comes up for us, and the first step is noticing, right? So, we have to build our self awareness, or maybe even have trusted, honest people around us who will be honest with us to point it out, because a lot of times it's really hard for us to see for ourselves that, like, oh, this is what's beneath why I'm not doing this. Yeah. This is why I recommend like a meditation and a writing practice so much, because it starts to sift through some of those things, starts to bring these parts with these concerns to the surface. And we might be able to spot these beliefs, right? Like last night I was at my tap class and I kind of felt left out. I heard people mention Sunday. It sounds like they're going to get together on Sunday, which is great, awesome for them. But I felt left out and it kind of stung for a little while. There was a part of me that felt like, oh, yeah, I never fit in, whatever. There were all these old messages that came in, right? And because I've done my inner work, I was able to be like, spot it quickly and be like, oh, yeah. So this morning when I did my morning writing, I was able to communicate with those parts of me that felt really hurt by that and work through some of that, give them a voice, but also remember that, like, oh, yeah, when I belong inside myself, I belong everywhere. And if I'm not invited somewhere, that doesn't mean I don't have value or that I'm not Like, I was going to say I'm not cool, but I don't know if I've ever been cool a day in my life, but like, you may be my people if you've thought that, right? Like, but I'm not fitting in or something. But what I know to be true and what I believe with my whole being, except these parts of me that sometimes get triggered, is that the right people find me when I show up authentically. But we don't get to that deeper message unless we do the work. And doing the work, to be able to do it, first we have to spot what's even coming up for us. And you might be thinking, well, how does that relate to a business? Well, let me tell you, it relates a lot, because if we feel like we struggle socially, which I don't know, we all got ADHD. I think most of us struggle socially at one point or another, even if only because we're info dumpers and other people think we interrupt. And I say other people think we interrupt. That's just how we do conversation, right? But neurotypical folks think we're interrupting. And so sometimes socially we may not do great. There are some people, like my neighbor, she has ADHD. She rocks it socially with her ADHD. I mean, that's amazing, right? She's also a different generation than me. So maybe that's why, I don't know, the younger generations seem a little more accepting and just kind of open to however people's energy is. But how does this relate to our business? Well, if you've ever struggled socially, you're going to be getting out in front of people to bring people into your business, and you're going to be helping people. And all of that is social. And so learning how to spot those times in your personal life where you're like, ooh, that stung, is important to sort through, because guess what's also going to sting? When your content doesn't land. When you do a launch and you don't get as many registrations as you want for the launch itself, let alone people to sign up for your program, right? Or if you do, I shouldn't say if, when you have a hater on your social media, like all of this inner work for ourselves directly relates to our business, because you are your business. You are the business. And yes, I know you're not your business. Like, you are more than your business. I get it. But if you're a small business owner, you're the product, especially if you're a digital, or service provider, you're the product. And so the way that you become the best product possible is by continuing to do this work and dealing with what pops up, right? Because if we don't deal with the limiting beliefs that pop up around the big fears and feelings we have when something happens in our lives, that stuff is going to happen in our business. But I got to tell you, it is just amplified, because you have way more contact with way more people when you're in business, especially if you're in online business, right? Like, there are just so many more people who you interact with there. So you can use those opportunities in your personal life to get a sense of like, ooh, I've got some parts of me who struggle with this, and then do that deeper work. We'll talk more about this in my live, but I want to kind of nod to it. The third thing that is kind of invisible, that becomes less invisible as you pay attention, that keeps so many ADHD women entrepreneurs stuck and not functioning well in their business, struggling to focus, having lots of distractions, is a dysregulated nervous system. And it seems to me more and more people are talking about the nervous system, which I get really excited about. But then I'm also like, a part of me, my therapist part, who has all this training and education, is like, I hope they're talking about it accurately, because the nervous system, right? We talk about our autonomic nervous system, which you've heard me talk about this before. There's three parts to it. One is ventral vagal, and that's where we are safe enough to rest, digest, and connect. And so we're never going to be in that system 100% of the time. It's not even possible, because we're in the world, right? Like, even if you're at home by yourself, I can't imagine you'd be able to be there constantly, right? Because then you wouldn't have connection and you'd feel lonely, and anyway, whatever. So we aren't going to be ventral vagal 100% of the time, but what we want to do is try and be there as much as we can, right? The other two states you've heard me talk about is our fight or flight response and our shutdown response. The first one is the sympathetic nervous system. The second one, the dorsal vagal response or shutdown response, is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the ventral vagal response is also part of the parasympathetic nervous system, but they have different roles, right? You don't have to remember this, by the way. I'm not going to quiz you later. So if you're like, ooh, I just glossed out, come back in English, right? Out of the brainy science stuff. Unless you're like, no, more of that, let me know in the show notes and I'll make sure I include a little more. But anyway, And so it's not that we're never going to be in our fight or flight response or we're never going to be in our shutdown response. It's just that we need to be regulated enough when we're doing things for our business so that we can actually focus and get stuff done. This is important for everyone, like whether you have ADHD or not. And I find it's particularly important for ADHD women in my experience. This is true for me. This is true for the people I work with. If we're dysregulated, focus is like out the window. Because remember that ventral vagal response plays a big part in being able to focus. I think there's also like it can be a blended thing where we have a little bit of sympathetic nervous system activation, not the full on fight or flight response, but a little bit of that to make us alert enough to focus. But if you're full on in your fight or flight response, remember, it doesn't matter if you digest the food in your belly. It doesn't matter if you are able to have a baby and reproduce. It doesn't matter if you can fight off the flu bug. It doesn't matter if you can create good content, right? Because you're just trying to get away from that danger. And your brain doesn't know the difference between fear of haters and a legitimate tiger chasing you. So what we need to do is figure out how do we regulate our nervous system at least enough when we're doing things in our business, both so we can focus, but also because when we're regulated, we're coming from a deeper, connected, more grounded place, a place where people can plug into. When people are in their fight or flight response, it can be a lot harder to plug into them because what does that feel like? It usually feels like anxiety, irritability, anger. And when people aren't grounded, I mean, it helps if they're a little bit exciting. If they're too flat of an affect, like if they're monotone or something, then it's like, oh my God, I'm going to go sleep, right? But if they're too activated, and I'm not saying too like someone's too much, but like if their activation in the sympathetic nervous system in their fight or flight response specifically is really high, it's very hard to follow them because that state is not one of organized thinking patterns. It's one of just trying to get the hell away from whatever's chasing you, whether that's an actual like life-threatening thing or it's something that your brain perceives as dangerous, like a negative comment on Facebook or not being invited out with your tap class, right? And so that's the third thing that we really, as ADHD women entrepreneurs, if we want our business to do well, we've got to sort this out stuff first. And that's why the live we're going to do is going to focus on unpacking that more. I'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming live in a moment, but I just can't end this podcast without saying this because I'm a trauma therapist first and foremost, right? I have a full-time private practice where I work with complex trauma and a crap ton of ADHD women, right? We attract the people that are like us, right? And what I notice so much with my ADHD women, even if they don't have a lot of complex trauma in their history, like I don't have a lot of complex trauma, but man, I had symptoms of it. And I was like, what is going on here? And, my clients come see me because in my private practice, because they have complex trauma, like that's my specialty. But what I notice doing their trauma work with them, when we work with the parts of them that are coming up, and when I do my own inner work, and I don't have complex PTSD, so much of that trauma, so much of those parts who are struggling because of the messages we received about who we are because of our ADHD brain, how we show up in the world, right? I think I've said this like every dang podcast since I read it, right? But by age, what was it, 9 or 10, we received 20,000 more comments, critical comments or corrective comments than someone without ADHD. And that's an estimate based on the assumption that we get 3 more critical or corrective comments than the average kid who doesn't have ADHD on every hour, right? That's a pretty low estimate, I think, right? That comes from a pediatric psychiatrist out of an Ivy League school. And to me, I'm like, yes, right? And I see that with my own eyes in my own self. And when I'm doing my own inner work, the parts of me that struggle, it's all of that. And I see it in my clients too. Yeah, sure. I do help clients in my private practice with things like sexual abuse or physical abuse or, severe neglect. I've got some people who survived cult abuse and torture. Is the struggles of being ADHD in a world not designed for us. And a lot of the parts that we end up working with are around that. That's not to say we don't also do some of the deeper work, or not, I don't want to say deeper, but other work around those other traumas. But remember, your brain doesn't know the difference. And that's crazy, right? Like your brain doesn't know the difference between being tortured or raped and someone criticizing you daily for your ADHD way of being, right? But it's true. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference. And so those things can be experienced as trauma. And, a lot of people are like, I don't have trauma. I had a great childhood. Well, yeah, I'm not saying you didn't have a good childhood. And your nervous system probably holds some stuff. You have parts that hold some stuff around being criticized for your ADHD, or at least constantly corrected, right? I received a lot of criticism, though most of mine was social, because the way I masked my ADHD and stayed out of trouble was through achievement and working so crazy hard and, getting those straight A's, or back when I was in elementary school, it was VGs, right? Very goods. But the thing I would get quote unquote in trouble for is talking too much, right? And I mean, my eighth grade teacher used to throw erasers at our heads when we were talking too much. And when I think back at those of us who got the erasers thrown at our heads, I mean, there were those big honking like elephant erasers, right? Like not the little short black one, but like the big honking one, right? For chalkboards, because we didn't have marker boards back then, at least not in schools. But he would throw those at our heads. And when I think about like, who are the kids that got that the most? It's me and my ADHD classmates who didn't know we had ADHD, because back then barely anyone was diagnosed, let alone women, right? And we can say like, "Oh, yeah, it's fine. It wasn't traumatic." But if you're having a hard time, like, stepping out and letting people hear your voice in your business, I guarantee that shit affected you, and that's part of what's holding you back. So if you're listening to this and you're like, "Wow, I would love to work on this more," I would love for you to join me. I have a 3-day live coming up. We're gonna meet for a couple hours on Thursday, December 28th. The morning, well, it's morning my time, of Tuesday, January 2nd, and then again, more afternoon time for Central Time folks on Tuesday, January 4th. And I'm excited to have you work through some of this with me. I'll also in that share a little bit more. If you decide you want to do some of this deeper work with me, I'll share how you can do that. No pressure. You're welcome to come and just enjoy our time together, get what you need. But there will be an opportunity if you're like, wow, Jen, I could really need some more guidance around this, to do that deeper work with me. So, and this will all happen right before my 50th birthday in January. So I turned 50 on January 6th. So I'm super excited about that. So this is like my 50th birthday launch bash. I feel like that should be the name, except then no one would know what we're doing. So stay tuned. I will have a link in the comments for how you can register for this. If you're not following the Self-Love Woman Way podcast yet, which is for ADHD women entrepreneurs, please follow. And I would love, love, love if you would share. Let's help each other out by helping other women who need to hear this message get it to them. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time and seeing you on the 28th. All right, take care.